have access to whatever food and drugs they want, correct?
Yes.
All right, now has the government already banned the use of several drugs?
Drugs that were found to be harmful, yes, but
Okay, so if they're found to be harmful, it's okay to ban them.
yeah, but we're not talking about drugs in this case. We're talking about food, and that's
Really? Okay,
yeah.
let's actually go back to our mandates. Are we only banning food, or are we banning crops that are used in drug research?
I believe L-tryptophan is an amino acid derived from turkey, so
L-tryptophan was the name of a drug, is that
yeah,
correct? Alright,
it's a supplement. Yeah.
which is a drug.
No, it's actually different, especially under FDA regulations. But
Okay, all right, let's move down. Now, does the government actually restrict our access to dangers right now?
does the government restrict our access to dangers?
Yes, you actually said that the government should never do that kind of thing. Does the government do that right now?
They see ways to intervene, but they rarely outright ban a substance.
Okay, but such as marijuana, they ban marijuana, right?
Yes, yes.
And they
but
ban cocaine.
those type of things, like I'm saying, are not the rule. They are the exception.
Okay, actually, you talk about trans fats, correct?
Sure.
Do you agree that several actual local governments have banned the use of trans fats, including New York City?
Yes, and I believe that's quite an atrocity.
All right, but your counterplay does not solve that.
Our counter plan doesn't address
All right,
trans
so you would
fats at all.
agree. You would
It's
agree
all
that.
for your homes.
All right, you would agree in the status quo there are things that the government restricts access to.
Sure, but what you're planning doing is
I
a
understand
nationwide ban, and that's a much worse precedent than a city banning
All right,
trans
but
fats.
you would agree that we have a nationwide ban on pot.
Sure.
Okay, let's move down now to your first disadvantage, the freedom of fatness.
Yes.
Now you basically talked about how we need to uphold. Yeah, well, you basically said this is too precautionary, correct?
It's an overreaction,
All right,
basically.
now let's just go back to your partner's argument that we must uphold the precautionary principle was one of its criteria, correct?
Sure.
And you would agree that the negative team is doing a precautionary approach,
The negative team, yeah.
and the affirmative team as well.
The affirmative team is not taking a precautionary approach. You're
Really?
saying, well, one thing, we screwed up with one drug, let's forget all
And
genetically
that is the
modified.
definition of the precautionary principle, correct?
What is?
Saying
Using one
saying
example
something.
and then making a rule? No.
Okay, we can actually
Precautionary
speak this way.
principle means we need to study it before we release it.
All right, now let's move down to your scientific benefit point. Now you talked about, now actually how many pieces of evidence did you read that actually ever talked about GM crops? Was that
GM
just the
crops?
Indian farmer's point?
No, the one I closed with, Indian farmers did, pest-resistant crops, that was my second
Okay,
disadvantage
you
card.
talked about India a lot. Now actually, how did you talk at all about looking at what had actually happened in India and talk about how the farmers actually reacted to the crops?
Yeah, it turns out that they became the second largest
You
exporter.
would also agree that the majority of them experienced losses from.
No, I didn't. I actually didn't have time to get to another card, but we can definitely bring up refutation after you bring up.
Well, actually, you'd agree that the round ends after our next speech, right?
I was not aware of that, but
Okay.
and I can give it to you right now if you need it.
Yeah, we'd actually like to see
Okay.
it.
That's fine.
All right. Okay. Thomas Edison, not Einstein, said that he found 99 ways to not make a light bulb. Well, I really want to apply that to my opponent's case here because they have pointed out one time when GMOs were part of the cause of a filtration process that killed 37 people. That's one way GMOs haven't worked. But there's so many ways they have, and more importantly, so many ways they can. I want to explain very quickly GMOs because it came out that my opponents don't fully understand the types of GMOs that are available, and then let's go through some voting issues. The first thing I have to clear up is I asked Dan in cross-examination if transgenic GMOs were the only kind of GMOs, and he said yes, and that's what their evidence addresses, but actually transgenic GMOs are the lesser used type of GMO. Cisgenetic, C-I-S genetic, GMOs are more used. Here's why. Transgenic means you took a fish gene and applied it to a rice gene. You crossed species. That's why it's transgenic or transgenetic, whatever it is. The other kind, which I'm not going to pronounce again, means that you took a wild rice and bred it with a cultivated rice. By far, that type of genetic modification is, one, more prevalent, and two, way more accurate. My opponents are not only unaware of the existence of that type of GMO, but they are also banning it, so that scientific progress cannot be made based on that type of process. Now, let's go through the voting issues here. I have two. The first one is evidence, the burden of proof, their case. My opponents have not offered one piece of evidence that supports their case. Not one piece said, ban GMOs. This was made as a point in my speech. My opponents had the opportunity to address this. Instead, we see that three pieces of evidence that actually make a recommendation in their case support my case. They support the idea that there would be stricter regulations. They support the application of the precautionary principle. They support the idea that we would have guilty until proven innocence as a standard, that we'd be safer about GMOs, but they do not support a ban. The second voting issue is criteria. Let's go through each of them, but first point out that efficiency, their second justification, can't be one of them. Efficiency can't be said about the Wright brothers inventing the airplane or the combustion engine or all kinds of other technological advances. That needs to be cast aside and outweighed by the incentives for scientific advancement, because someday biotechnology, which can allow you to plant crops on previously unused soil because you couldn't use that soil, which can allow you to reduce the use of pesticides, as my partner showed, which can allow you to increase the overall crop yield and decrease the overall crop area. All these potentials exist and they outweigh any present efficiency or deficiencies that my opponents may find. So the three voting issues are under criteria are incentives for scientific advancement. My partner offered the hurt incentives disadvantage, which clearly proves this, and it outweighs efficiency. Second voting issue is the precautionary principle. My opponents say we're not actually applying the precautionary principle. I say yes, we are, but regardless of whether you think that the words precautionary principle are not applied, look at how I explained it. I explained it as guilty until proven innocent, just like the pharmaceutical system. We have a clear example of how our counterplan works by the status quo. My opponents don't know exactly what GMOs are, but we know exactly and can offer for you the method by which GMOs should and can be regulated. That is the same way they have regulated pharmaceuticals for decades. The third voting issue is choice. The nanny state disadvantage applies here. If you enact my opponent's plan, you establish a principle of United States federal governments that can go to the very kitchen in which you live. And that is something that is sacred. It is something that the federal government should not enter. My opponents say, but marijuana is banned. Well, marijuana is not actually banned. It's banned for common consumption by the feds, but some states are able to make different regulations, and it's used in medical instances. My opponents say that New York City banned trans fat. Yes, that's a travesty, but the federal government didn't ban trans fat, because that is nowhere in the enumerated powers of this federal government. It has not been given to the government by this people who are in this room, whether New York City did it or not. The federal government of the United States of America cannot choose for you what you will and will not eat. As long as it says it on the label, which our counterplan ensures that it does, that choice is left to you, because you are a self-governing people, you are not from Venezuela, and you will have the ability to choose for yourself what quality of life means to you. Seconds.